The soft hum of the truck's engine was the only sound that filled the air as Jake Stevens drove down the lonely stretch of Route 44, the wind gently howling against the windows. The headlights of the truck cast long, eerie shadows across the empty road, flanked on either side by thick forests. The air was cold, and the silence was almost suffocating. Jake was no stranger to the solitude of long-haul driving. He'd spent years navigating the highways, hauling goods across the country. But tonight felt different. There was an unexplainable heaviness in the air, a strange stillness that seemed to cling to everything. It was around 2 a.m. when Jake began to feel the weight of the night creeping in. The vast, endless darkness outside was made even more unsettling by the silence that surrounded him. It was a perfect moment for thoughts to wander into darker places. His eyes were heavy with fatigue, but he forced himself to stay alert, knowing that the road was treacherous, especially at this hour. He was headed from New York City to Chicago, a route that took him down the infamous Route 44. The road was known for its emptiness, a long stretch where few cars dared to venture at night. Legends had always surrounded this route. Stories of disappearances, mysterious sightings, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. Jake, however, was a skeptic. He believed in the logic of the road, in the necessity of delivering goods on time. Superstitions didn't have a place in his world. As the miles passed, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He pushed it aside, telling himself it was just exhaustion. But then he saw it, a figure standing on the side of the road. At first it was just a blur, a shadow that caught his peripheral vision. But as he drew closer, the image became clearer. A woman. She was standing motionless in the middle of nowhere, her white dress billowing in the wind, her hair wild and unkempt, her face obscured by the dark strands. But her eyes were visible. They seemed to glow in the darkness, a haunting shade of red that sent a chill straight to Jake's spine. Jake's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't unusual to see hitchhikers or stragglers on this long, desolate road. But something about this woman felt wrong. He tried to ignore her, focusing instead on the road ahead. But the image of her stood out like a ghost in his mind. The truck rumbled forward, and for a brief moment, Jake thought he had outrun the sight. But then, out of nowhere, a sharp jolt shook the truck. It felt like something had hit it, a powerful force slamming into the side. Jake slammed on the brakes and looked around, his heart racing. He quickly got out of the truck, expecting to see a flat tire or perhaps debris on the road. But there was nothing except the endless stretch of empty highway. A wave of unease washed over him as he got back into the truck. His hands trembled as he started the engine again, but the truck wouldn't budge. The engine sputtered, coughing to life before dying once more. Panic crept up his spine as he tried again. This time the engine roared to life, but as soon as he shifted into gear and began to move, he heard it. A soft, unsettling whisper, like a voice just on the edge of hearing. Jake's skin crawled as he glanced into the rearview mirror. There was nothing there, nothing but the empty, desolate road behind him. Suddenly, the truck jerked again, this time much harder. Jake's eyes widened as he turned to look out the window. The woman, she was standing right there, directly in front of the truck, her glowing red eyes fixed on him. She was no longer on the side of the road. She was in front of him, blocking his path. Her gaze felt like it was piercing through him, digging into his soul. Every instinct in Jake screamed for him to drive away, but his body refused to move. Fear, cold and primal, had taken over. For a split second, time seemed to slow, and then, as if moving of its own accord, his foot slammed onto the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, but the woman didn't move. Instead, she began walking slowly towards the truck, her eyes never leaving Jake's. The closer she got, the more he could see the terrifying details. The long, tattered white dress that looked as though it had been stained with time, the wild, matted hair that framed her pale face, and the deep, unnerving redness in her eyes that seemed to burn with unrelenting anger. Jake's heart raced as he glanced in the rearview mirror. In his peripheral vision, he could see her closing the distance, matching the truck's speed. His hands tightened around the steering wheel, and he slammed his foot down harder on the accelerator. but no matter how fast he drove, the woman kept pace, running with unnatural speed. Then, with a sickening sound, her hand slammed against the window. The sound of her nails scraping against the glass echoed inside the truck. It was a sound so chilling that it felt like it had crawled into his very bones. Jake screamed, the noise of it mingling with the hollow roar of the engine. Before he could react, the truck swerved wildly as if pulled by some unseen force. The tires screamed against the road as the truck careened off the path and smashed into a tree. The impact was brutal, and the world around Jake went black. The next morning, the sun's pale light began to cut through the dense trees, casting long shadows across the wrecked truck. When the local police arrived at the scene, they found Jake's truck wrecked and abandoned on the side of the road. His body was slumped in the driver's seat, his eyes wide open, staring straight ahead into nothingness. His expression was one of pure terror, but his lips were silent. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of what had happened to him. The officers couldn't understand it. His truck had simply veered off the road, crashing into a tree, and he had never even screamed. Jake's death sent ripples through the local community. People who knew him were baffled, unable to understand how such a thing could happen to a man as strong-willed as him. Whispers spread quickly. Some said it was an accident, pure and simple. Others, however, pointed to the growing number of strange occurrences along Route 44. The stories had been there for years, stories about the haunting woman in white, the one who had been seen on this very road by many other drivers, all of whom had suffered inexplicable fates. They said she was a ghost, a restless spirit of a woman who had died on this very stretch of road many years ago, her soul forever trapped in torment. As the rumor spread, a sense of unease settled over the town. The highway, once a simple, mundane route, became known as Death's Road. No trucker wanted to pass through that stretch after dark. Anyone who dared to do so found themselves faced with the same terrifying sight. The woman in white, her red eyes burning with hatred and sorrow. Months passed, and the legend of the woman in white grew stronger. Many drivers swore they had seen her, but no one dared to speak about it. The fear was too real. Those who had passed the road never came back the same, and some never returned at all. Mark Harris, a truck driver and close friend of Jake's, refused to believe the rumors. He couldn't accept that his best friend had been taken by something as ridiculous as a ghost. Mark had always been a man of reason. He believed in hard facts, not superstitions. But the fear was beginning to get to him. He had heard the stories from other drivers, had seen the cautionary looks from his colleagues, but he refused to believe that a woman in a white dress could be responsible for Jake's death. One night, Mark decided he would take the route himself. He would prove to everyone that there was nothing to fear. It was just a stretch of road like any other, and the death of his friend was nothing more than an unfortunate accident. He would drive through it, just like he always had. The night was cold as Mark set out for his long haul, his truck rolling along the deserted highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. As he neared Route 44, his heart began to race, but he kept his composure. This was nothing, just an old road. No ghosts, no spirits. But then he saw her. The woman in white. She was standing in the same spot where Jake had seen her, her form almost glowing in the moonlight. Her hair was wild and tangled, and her red eyes burned into Mark's. He tried to tell himself that it was nothing, just a trick of the light. But the moment their eyes met, a chill ran down his spine. Something deep within him knew that this wasn't just a figment of his imagination. He slowed the truck, but something inside him urged him to keep going. "Don't stop," he muttered to himself. But as he accelerated, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of something heavy thudding against the roof of the truck. He whipped his head around, and to his horror, the woman was sitting on the roof, her long fingers scraping against the metal. Panic surged through Mark as he slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The woman was already there, her face twisted into a grotesque smile. She reached for him with cold, sharp hands. Mark screamed, but his voice was lost in the terrifying howl of the wind. The last thing he saw was the woman's red eyes, and then everything went black. The next morning, Mark's truck was found off the road, its cab destroyed. His body was slumped in the driver's seat, his face frozen in a look of absolute terror. His eyes were wide open, just like Jake's, and there was no sign of a struggle. As the news spread, the locals began to avoid Route 44 entirely. Even truck companies began rerouting their trucks, refusing to take the risk. The legend of the woman in white had become an undeniable truth for many. There was no explaining it. No one could understand what had happened, but the fear was real. Drivers began to call it Death's Road, and they spoke of it in hushed whispers, as though speaking too loudly might summon the ghost. The town was left in silence, the mystery of the woman in white still unresolved. The road that had once been a simple path for travelers became a place of terror and tragedy, where the lost souls of the past roamed, searching for something. Retribution, perhaps, or peace. And as the years passed, the story of the woman in white continued to grow, spreading across the country. Many believed she was a ghost, seeking revenge for an untold tragedy. Some said she was searching for someone who had wronged her in life, someone who would never escape her wrath. No one knew for sure. All anyone knew was that once you encountered her, you would never be the same. Some say that if you drive down Route 44 at night, you can still see her, a fleeting figure in white, her red eyes glowing from the shadows. And if you're not careful, she might just catch you.